Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are completing The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. This is the editor's narrative concluded. What can this work be? Sure, you will say it must be an allegory, or as the writer calls it, a religious parable, showing the dreadful danger of self-righteousness. I cannot tell. Attend to the sequel, which is a thing so extraordinary, so unprecedented, and so far out of the common course of human events, that if there were not hundreds of living witnesses to attest to the truth of it, I would certainly not bid any rational being believe it. In the first place, take the following extract from an authentic letter published in Blackwood's magazine for August 1823. On the top of a wild height called Cowanscroft, where the lands of three proprietors meet all at one point, there has been for a long and many years the grave of a suicide marked out by a stone standing at the head, and another at the feet. Often I have stood musing over it myself, when a shepherd, on one of the farms of which it formed the extreme boundary, and thinking what could induce a young man who had scarcely reached the prime of life to brave his Maker, and rush into his presence by an act of his own erring hand, and one so unnatural and preposterous. But it never once occurred to me, as an object of curiosity, to dig up the mouldering bones of the culprit, which I consider the most revolting of all objects. The thing was, however, done last month, and a discovery made of one of the greatest natural phenomena that I have heard in this country. The little traditionary history that remains of this unfortunate youth is altogether a singular one. He was not a native of the place, nor would he ever tell from what place he came, but he was remarkable for a deep, thoughtful, and sullen disposition. There was nothing against his character that anybody knew of here, and he had been a considerable time in the place. The last service he was in with Mr. Anderson of Eltrive, Altry, the King's Burn, who died about 100 years ago, and who had hired him during the summer to herd a stock of young cattle in Eltrive Hope. It happened one day in the month of September that James Anderson, his master's son, went with this young man to the Hope to divert himself. The herd had his dinner along with him, and about 1 o'clock, when the boy proposed going home, the former pressed him very hard to stay and take his share of his dinner, but the boy refused for fear his parents might be alarmed about him, and said he would go home, on which the herd said to him, "Then if you winna stay with me, James, ye may depend on it, I'll cut my throat afore ye come back again." I have heard it likewise reported, but only by one person, that there had been some things stolen out of his master's house a good while before, and that the boy had discovered a silver knife and fork that was a part of the stolen property in the herd's possession that day, and that it was this discovery that drove him to despair. The boy did not return to the Hope that afternoon, and before evening a man coming in at the pass called the Hart Loop with a drove of lambs on the way for Edinburgh perceived something like a man standing in a strange, frightful position at the side of one Eldenhope hayricks. The driver's attention was riveted on this strange, uncouth figure, and as the drove rode past at no great distance from the spot, he first called, but receiving no answer, he went up to the spot, and behold, it was the above-mentioned young man, who had hung himself in the hay-rope that was tying down the rick. This was accounted a great wonder, and everyone said that if the devil had not assisted him, it was impossible the thing could have been done. For in general, these ropes are so brittle, being made of green hay, that they will scarcely bear to be bound over the rick. And the more to horrify the good people of his neighborhood, the driver said when he first came in view, he could almost give his oath that he saw 2 people busily engaged at the hayrick, going round and round and round it, and he thought they were dressing it. If this asseveration approximated at all to truth, it makes this evident, at least, that the unfortunate young man had hanged himself after the man with the lambs came in view. He was, however, quite dead when he cut him down. He had fastened 2 of the old hay ropes at the bottom of the rick on one side, indeed they are all fastened so when the first laid on, so that he had nothing to do but to loosen 2 of the ends on the other side. These he had tied in a knot around his neck, and then slackening his knees and letting himself down gradually till the hay rope bore all his weight, he had contrived to put an end to his existence in that way. Now the fact is that if you try all the ropes that are thrown over all the outfield hayricks in Scotland, there is not one among 1,000 of them will hang a collie dog, so that the manner of this wretch's death was rather a singular circumstance. Early next morning, Mr. Anderson's servants went reluctantly away, and taking an old blanket with them for a winding sheet, they rolled up the body of the deceased, first in his own plaid, letting the hay rope still remain about his neck, and then rolling the old blanket over all, they bore the loathed remains away to the distance of 3 miles or so, on spokes to the top of Cowan's Croft, at the very point where the Duke of Buccleuch's land, the Laird of Drummelizer's, and Lord Napier's meet. And there they buried him, with all that he had on and about him, silver knife and fork and all together. Thus far went tradition, and no one ever disputed one jot of the disgusting oral tale. A nephew of that Mr. Anderson's, who was with the hapless youth that day he died, says that as far as he can gather from the relations of friends that he remembers, and of that same uncle in particular, it is 105 years next month, that is September 1823, since that event happened. And I think it likely that this gentleman's information is correct. But sundry other people, much older than he, whom I have consulted, pretend that it is 6 or 7 years more. They say they have heard that Mr. James Anderson was then a boy 10 years of age, that he lived to an old age, upwards of 80, and it is 42 years since he died. Whichever way it may be, it was about that period some way, of that there is no doubt. It so happened that 2 young men, William Shiel and W. Sword, were out on an adjoining height this summer casting peats, and it came into their heads to open this grave in the wilderness, and see if there were any of the bones of the suicide of former ages and centuries remaining. They did so, but opened only 1/2 of the grave, beginning at the head and about the middle at the same time. It was not long till they came upon the old blanket. I think they said not much more than a foot from the surface. They tore that open, and there was the hay rope lying stretched down along his breast, so fresh that they saw it at first sight that it was made of risp, a sort of long sword-grass that grows about the marshes and sides of the lakes. One of the young men seized the rope and pulled by it, but the old enchantment of the devil remained. It would not break, and so he pulled and pulled at it. Behold, the body came up into a sitting posture, with a broad blue bonnet on its head, and its plaid around it all the fresh as day as it were laid in. I never heard of a preservation so wonderful, if it be true as was related to me, for still I have not had the curiosity to go and view the body myself. The features were all so plain that an old acquaintance might easily have known him. One of the lads gripped the face of the corpse with his finger and thumb, and the cheeks felt quite soft and fleshy, but the dimples remained and did not spring out again. He had fine yellow hair, about 9 inches long, but not a hair of it could they pull out till they cut part of it off with a knife. They also cut off some portions of his clothes, which were all quite fresh, and distributed them among their acquaintances, sending a portion to me amongst the rest to keep as natural curiosities. Several gentlemen have in a manner forced me to give them fragments of these enchanted garments. I have, however, retained a small portion for you, which I send along with this, being a piece of his plaid, and another of his waistcoat breast, which you will see are still fresh as fresh that day they were laid in the grave. His broad blue bonnet was sent to Edinburgh several weeks ago, to the great regret of some gentlemen connected with the land, who wished to have it for a keepsake. For my part, fond as I am of blue bonnets, and broad ones in particular, I declare I durst not have worn that one. There was nothing of the silver knife and fork discovered, that I heard of, nor was it very likely it should. But it would appear he had been very near run of cash, which I dare say had been the cause of his utter despair. For on searching his pockets nothing was found but 3 old Scots halfpennies. These young men meeting with another shepherd afterwards, his curiosity was so much excited that they went and digged up the curious remains a second time, which was a pity, as it likely by these exposures to air and from the impossibility of bearing it up again as closely as it was before, the flesh will now fall to dust. The letter from which the above is an extract is signed James Hogg and dated from Altreve Lake, August 1st, 1823. It bears the stamp of authenticity in every line, yet so often had I been hoaxed by the ingenious fancies displayed in that magazine that when this relation met my eye, I did not believe it. But from the moment that I perused it, I half formed the resolution of investigating these wonderful remains personally, if any such existed. For in the immediate vicinity of the scene, as I supposed, I knew of more attractive metal than the dilapidated remains of mouldering suicides. Accordingly, having some business in Edinburgh in September last, and being obliged to wait a few days for the arrival of a friend from London, I took that opportunity to pay a visit to my townsman and fellow collegian Mr. L. of C., advocate. I mentioned to him Hogg's letter, asking him if the statement was founded at all on truth. His answer was, "I suppose so. For my part, I never doubted the thing, having been told that there had been a deal of talking about it up at the forest for some time past. But God knows, Hogg was imposed as ingenious lies on the public ere now." I said if it was within reach, I should like exceedingly to visit both the shepherd and the Scots mummy he had described. Mr. L. assented at the first proposal, saying he had no objections to take a ride that length with me and make the fellow produce his credentials. That we would have a delighted jaunt through a romantic and now classical country, and some good sport into the bargain, provided he could procure a horse for me from his father-in-law next day. He sent up to a Mr. L. to inquire, who returned for answer that there was an excellent pony at my service, and that he himself would accompany us, being obliged to attend a great sheep fair at Thirlestane, and that he was certain the shepherd would be there likewise. Mr. L. said that was the very man he wanted to make our party complete, and at an early hour next morning we started for the Ewe Fair at Thirlestane, taking Blackwood's magazine for August along with us. We rode through the ancient royal burgh of Selkirk, halted and cornered our horses at a romantic village nigh to some deep lyns on the Ettrick, and reached the market grounds at Thirlestane Green a little before midday. We soon found Hogg standing near the foot of the market, as he called it, beside a great drove of pollies, a species of stock that I never heard of before. They were small sheep, striped on the backs with red chalk. Mr. L. introduced me to him as a great wool stapler come to raise the price of that article, but he eyed me with distrust, and turned his back on us, answered, "I hae selled mine." I followed, and showing him the above-quoted letter, said I was exceedingly curious to have a look of these singular remains he had so ingeniously described, but he only answered me with the remark that it was a queer fancy for a wool stapler to take. His two friends then requested him to accompany us to the spot, and to take some of his shepherds with us to assist in raising the body, but he spurned at the idea, saying, "Od bless ye, lad, I hae ither matters to mind. I hae the pollies to sell, and yon Highland stots down on the green every ane. And then I hae 10 scores of ewes to buy after, and if I canna first sell my ain stock, I canna buy nae either body's. I hae mair ado than I can manage the day, for by ganging to hook up 100-year-old bairns." Finding that we could make nothing of him, we left him with his pollies, Highland stots, grey jacket, and broad blue bonnet, to go in search of some other guide. L. soon found one, for he seemed acquainted with every person in the fair. We got a fine old shepherd named W. B., a great original, and a very obliging, a civil man, who asked no conditions, but that we should not speak of it, because he did not wish it to come to his master's ears that he had been engaged in a sic a profane thing. We promised strict secrecy, and accompanied by another farmer, Mr. S., and old B., we proceeded to the grave which B. described as about 1.5 miles distant from the market ground. We went into a shepherd's cot to get a drink of milk, when I read to our guide Mr. Hogg's description, asking him if he thought it correct. He said there was not a bit of it correct, for the grave was not on the hill of Cohen's Croft, nor yet on the point where the 3 lairds' lands meet, but on the top of the hill called the Faw-Law, where there was no land that was not of the Duke of Buccleuch's within 1/4 of a mile. He added that it was a wonder how the poet could be mistaken there, who once herded the very ground where the grave is, and saw both hills from his own window. Mr. L. testified great surprise at such a singular blunder, as also how the body came not to be buried at the meeting of 3 or 4 lairds' lands, which had always been customary in the south of Scotland. Our guide said he had always heard it reported that the Eltreve men, with a Mr. David Anderson at their head, had risen before day on the Monday morning, it having been on the Sabbath day that the man put down himself, and that they set out with the intention of burying him on Cowan's Croft, where 3 marches met at a point. But it having been an invariable rule to bury such lost sinners before the rising of the sun, these 5 men were overtaken by daylight as they passed the house of Barrynoe, and by the time they reached the top of the Fallaw, the sun was beginning to scare the east. On this they laid down the body, and digged a deep grave with all expedition. But when they had done, it was too short, and the body being stiff it would not go down, on which Mr. David Anderson, looking to the east, and perceiving that the sun would be up on them in a few minutes, set his foot on the suicide's brow, and tramped down his head into the grave with his iron-heeled shoe, until his nose and skull crashed again, and at the same time uttered a terrible curse on the wretch who had disgraced the family, and given them all this trouble. This anecdote, our guide said he had heard when a boy from the mouth of Robert Laidlaw, one of the 5 men who buried the body. We soon reached the spot, and I confessed I felt a singular sensation when I saw the grey stone standing at the head, and another at the feet, and one half of the grave manifestly new digged, and closed up again as had been described. I could still scarcely deem the thing to be a reality, for the ground did not appear to be wet, but a kind of dry rotten moss. On looking around we found some fragments of clothes, some teeth, and part of a pocket-book, which had not been returned into the grave, when the body had been last raised, for it had been twice raised before this, but only from the loins upward. To work we fell with 2 spades, and soon cleared away the whole of the covering. The part of the grave that had been opened before was filled with mossy mortar, which impeded us exceedingly, and entirely prevented a proper investigation of the 4 parts of the body. I will describe everything as I saw it before 4 respectable witnesses, whose names I shall publish at large if permitted. A number of the bones came up separately, for with the constant flow of liquid stuff into the deep grave, we could not see to preserve them in their places. At length great loads of coarse clothes, blanketing, plaiding, etc. appeared. We tried to lift these regularly up, and on doing so part of a skeleton came up, but no flesh, save a little that was hanging in a dark flitters about the spine, but which had no consistence. It was merely the appearance of flesh without substance. The head was wanting, and I being very anxious to possess the skull, the search was renewed among the mortar and rags. We first found a part of the scalp, with the long hair firm on it, which on being cleaned is neither black nor fair, but of a darkish dusk, the most common of any other color. Soon afterwards we found the skull, but it was not complete. A spade had damaged it, and one of the temple quarters was wanting. I am no phrenologist, not knowing one organ from another, but I thought the skull of that wretched man no study. If it was particular for anything, it was for a smooth, almost perfect rotundity with only a little protuberance above the vent of the ear. When we came to the part of the grave that had never been opened before, the appearance of everything was quite different. There the remains lay under a close vault of moss, and within a vacant space, and I suppose by the digging in the former part of the grave that the part had been deepened, and drawn the moisture away from this part, for here all was perfect. The breeches still suited the thigh, the stocking the leg, and the garters were wrapped as neatly and as firm below the knee as if they had been newly tied. The shoes were all opened in the seams, the hemp having decayed, but the soles, upper leathers, and wooden heels, which were made of birch, were all as fresh as any of those we wore. There was one thing I could not help remarking, that in the inside of one of the shoes there was a layer of cow's dung, about 1/8 of an inch, and in the hollow of the sole fully 1/4 of an inch. It was firm, green, and fresh, and proved that he had been working in a byre. His clothes were all of singular ancient cut, and no less singular in their texture. Their durability certainly would have been prodigious, for in thickness, coarseness, and strength I never saw any cloth in the smallest degree to equal them. His coat was a frock coat of a yellowish drab color with wide sleeves. It is twilled, milled, and thicker than a carpet. I cut off 2 of the skirts and brought them with me. His vest was of a striped serge, such as I have often seen worn by country people. It was lined and backed with white stuff. The breeches were a sort of striped plaiting which I never saw worn, but which our guide assured us was very common in the country once, though from the old clothes which he had seen remaining of it he judged that it could not be less than 200 years since it was in fashion. His garters were of worsted and striped with black or blue. His stockings, grey and wanting the feet. I brought samples of all along with me. I have likewise now got possession of the bonnet, which puzzles me most of all. It is not conformable with the rest of the dress. It is neither a broad bonnet nor a border bonnet, for there is an open behind for trying which no genuine border bonnet, I am told, ever had. It seems to have been a Highland bonnet, worn in a flat way like a scone on the crown, such as is sometimes still seen in the west of Scotland. All the limbs from the loins to the toes seemed perfect and entire, but they could not bear handling. Before we got them returned again into the grave, they were all shaken to pieces, except the thighs, which continued to retain a kind of flabby form. All his clothes that were sewed with linen yarn were lying in separate portions, the thread having rotten, but such as were sewed with a worsted remained perfectly firm and sound. Among such a confusion we had hard work to find out all his pockets, and our guide supposed that after all we did not find above the half of them. In his vest pocket was a long clasp knife, very sharp, the haft was thin, and the scales shone if there had been silver inside. Mr. S.C. took it with him and presented it to his neighbor, Mr. R.N. of W.N.L.E., who still has it in his possession. We found a comb, a gimlet, a vial, a small neat square board, a pair of plated knee buckles, and several samples of cloth of different kinds rolled neatly up within one another. At length, while we were busy on the search, Mr. L.T. picked up a leathern case, which seemed to have been wrapped round and round by some ribbon or cord that had been rotten from it. For the swaddling mark still remained. Both L.W. and B.E. called it that it was the tobacco spluchen, and a well-filding, too. But on opening it out, we found to our great astonishment that it contained a printed pamphlet. We were all very curious to see what a sort of pamphlet such a person would read, what it could contain that he seemed to have had such a care about. For the slough in which it was rolled was fine chamois leather, and the color it had been could not be known, but the pamphlet was wrapped so close together and so damp, rotten, and yellow that it seemed one solid piece. We all concluded, from some words that we could make out, that it was a religious tract, but that it would be impossible to make anything of it. Mr. L.W. remarked that it was a great pity if a few sentences could not be made out of it, for that it was a question what might be contained in that little book, and then he requested Mr. L.T. to give it to me, as he had seen so many things of literature and law attend to, that he would never think more of it. He replied that either of us were heartily welcome to it, for that he had thought of returning it into the grave if he could have made out but a line or two, to have seen what was its tendency. "Grave, man!" exclaimed L.W., who speaks excellent strong broad Scots. "My truly, but ye grave weel, I would esteem the contents of that spluchen as the most precious treasure." "I'll tell you what it is, sir. I have often wondered how it was that this man's corpse had been miraculously preserved frae decay 100 times longer than any other body's, or than ever a tanner's. But now I could wager a guinea it has been for the preservation of that little book. And Lord kens what may be in it. It will maybe reveal some mystery that mankind disna ken nothing about yet." "If there be any mysteries in it," returned the other, "it is not for your handling, my dear friend, who are too much taken up about mysteries already." And with these words he presented the mysterious pamphlet to me. With very little trouble, save that of a thorough drying, I unrolled it with ease, and found the very tract which I have here ventured to lay before the public, part of it in small bad print, and the remainder in manuscript, The title page is written as follows: The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner, written by himself, Fideli Certa Mercies. And alongst the head it is the same as given in the present edition of the work. I altered the title to A Self-Justified Sinner, but my booksellers did not approve of it. And there being a curse pronounced by the writer on him that should dare to alter or amend, I have let it stand as it is. Should it be thought to attach discredit to any received principles of our Church, I am blameless. The printed part ends at page 222, and the rest is in a fine old hand, extremely small and close. I have ordered the printer to procure a facsimile of it, to be bound in with the volume. With regard to the work itself, I dare not venture a judgment, for I do not understand it. I believe no person, man or woman, will ever peruse it with the same attention that I have done, and yet I confess that I do not comprehend the writer's drift. It is certainly impossible that these scenes could ever have occurred that he describes as having himself transacted. I think it may be possible that he had some hand in the death of his brother, and yet I am disposed greatly to doubt it, and the numerous distorted traditions, etc., which remain of that event may be attributable to the work having been printed and burnt, and of course the story known to all the printers, with their families and gossips. That the young Laird of Dowcastle came by a violent death, there remains no doubt, but that this wretch slew him, there is to me a good deal. However, allowing this to have been the case, I account all the rest either dreaming or madness, or as he says to Mr. Watson, a religious parable on purpose to illustrate something scarcely tangible, but to which he seems to have attached great weight. Were the relation at all consistent with reason, it corresponds so minutely with traditionary facts that it could scarcely have missed to have been received as authentic. But in this day, and with the present generation, it will not go down that a man should be daily tempted by the devil in the semblance of a fellow creature, and at length lured to self-destruction in the hopes that this same fiend and tormentor was to suffer and fall along with him. It was a bold theme for an allegory, and would have suited that age well had it been taken up by one fully qualified for the task, which this writer was not. In short, we must either conceive him not only the greatest fool, but the greatest wretch, on whom was ever stamped the form of humanity, or that he was a religious maniac who wrote and wrote about a deluded creature till he arrived at that height of madness that he believed himself the very object whom he had been all along describing, and in order to escape from the ideal tormentor, committed that act for which, according to the tenets he embraced, there was no remission, and which consigned his memory and his name to everlasting detestation. Finis. This is the end of Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. Thank you for listening.